Hey, welcome to the Haftarah for Vayera. We're in 2 Kings 4, verses 1 through 37. So go ahead and read that first before you do this lesson. So, gosh, I really already miss Isaiah. I miss his words of comfort. They've been great, yeah. Feels like we're really switching gears in this Haftarah. And we're going to take a look at two miracle stories of the prophet Elisha. Now, I wonder, am I the only one who's ever gotten tripped up over Elijah and Elisha? Because the English version of their names sounds super similar and it kind of makes it confusing. But in Hebrew, it's less similar. So the earlier prophet Elijah, in Hebrew, that's Eliyahu. And in Hebrew, Elisha, which is this Haftarah's prophet, that's Elishua. And Elishua means, my God is salvation. So I think that's kind of cool. Now, the two prophets, Eliyahu and Elishua, they lived in the northern kingdom of Israel during the reign of the evil Ahab and Jezebel. Now, this was the king and the queen who tried to destroy the worship of the God of Israel and replace it with worship of a local god. Israel was living in a drought during this time and it had damaged the economy. So Eliyahu and Elishua, they traveled throughout the countryside to kind of revive the people's connection to God. Now, also at this time, under the direction of evil Queen Jezebel, there were many godly prophets who had been murdered. So Eliyahu and Elishua, they kind of started a school of prophets and rose up lots of disciples to kind of replace those that had been murdered. Now, if you remember, before Eliyahu, see, I still do it, before Eliyahu ascended to heaven in that fiery chariot, he had passed his mantle of prophethood onto Elishua, who was his primary disciple and his successor. So Elishua is the prophet of this Haftarah, and he's known for 10 miracles that he performed during his time as a prophet. We get to read about 2 of these in this portion. And both of the miracles, interestingly, that we read about in this portion were showing Elishua helping 2 women to gain or regain dignity and hope. So I'm kind of tempted just to talk about these 2 miracle stories of Elishua's because they're so cool and they have a lot of spiritual lessons to teach us. But I'm not going to do that because I want to talk about one of the miracle stories and how it ties into the Torah portion Vayera. And I'm choosing this one particular story because of the practical application that we can draw. Now, again, we can revisit the Haftarah every year, right? Okay, so here's the story. Elishua often visited a town called Shunem, where a local woman and her husband often hosted him with great hospitality. They even arranged for the prophet to have his own room on the roof of their home, and they completely provided for every one of his needs whenever he visited town. Now, after having been a recipient of their hospitality many, many times, Elishua asked the woman how he could repay them. He suggested that his good standing with the king, who was now King Jotham now, that might kind of allow her to have something valuable as a thank you from the prophet. And her answer was awesome. She said, "No, thank you. I dwell among my people." Now, what that means is she was saying, I'm just a regular woman and no more special than anybody else. I don't want to be given any special treatment. Well, Elishua's servant informed the prophet that, well, there was actually something that this couple could use. They were childless and older in age. So she really did have a great need. So Elishua called for the woman, and he said, in English, he said, at this season, at this time next year, you will be embracing a child. Now that is the direct link between this Haftarah and the Torah portion for this week. Because in the Torah portion, Abraham and Sarah were blessed with a child after many years of childlessness. So this woman from Shunem, we call her the Shunammite woman, she was granted a child at her advanced age, just as Isaac's, and then another parallel is that just as Isaac's birth in the Torah portion was foretold by an angel, the birth of the Shunammite woman's child was foretold by a prophet. Now, let's take a look at the phrase, at this season, at this time next year, you'll be embracing a child. Okay, because that's the twin phrase in English for both the Haftarah and the Torah portion. Now, this phrase is special. It only occurs 4 times in the Bible. 2 times in Genesis 18, being about the promised birth of Isaac, and that's the Torah portion for this week. And then 2 times in this Haftarah in 2 Kings, being said to the Shunammite woman. Now, the phrase that repeats both in the Torah portion and about Isaac's birth and the child of the Shunammite woman, this includes the phrase, at the appointed time. Okay? That's moed in Hebrew. Now, this can mean a fixed time, but it also refers to feast days. So the birth of a promised son in both of these accounts alludes to the coming Messiah who will come at the appointed time. Now, these parallels between the Haftarah and the Torah portion, I think, are a really great example of the beauty of making connections between the Torah and the Haftarah. And I think this is why studying the Haftarahs is so special, because sometimes the Haftarah can give us insight back into the Torah portion. So how does that occur here? Well, it's those 2 identical promises of childbirth that come after 2 acts of outstanding hospitality. Now, as the Torah portion in Genesis begins, Abraham's sitting outside of his tent, and the sages say that he has just completed adult circumcision and he's recovering from that, and he's sitting outside in the heat of the day waiting for visitors just to bestow hospitality on them. And so then he does have visitors, right? And he says to them, well, let me bring you some water and a little bit of bread. But what he and Sarah actually do is prepare a feast well above and beyond even the high standards of hospitality in that region and in that time period. Now, the Shunammite woman from our Haftarah, well, of course, she's a descendant of Abraham and Sarah, and she also takes her hospitality to a really high level for the prophet Elishua and makes him a room in her home. Now, if the Torah portion had only been about, or if this story, okay, had only been about Abraham and Sarah, we probably wouldn't get the connection with hospitality, right? We might not have known that it was the hospitality of them that kind of tipped the scales as to the timing of the fulfillment of God's promise to them of a child. But when that story of hospitality and child repeats in the Haftarah, and a promise to give a child is given in the context of hospitality, then we can kind of see a connection, right? And we can see a deeper truth in the 2 stories. Now, in one of the commentaries that I was reading on this Haftarah, the author said, which I thought was brilliant, was that raising a child is actually a form of hospitality itself. Now, keep in mind that in the ancient world, hospitality was a huge deal. It was bigger than what we in the West understand hospitality to be. When you took somebody into your home, you were pledging to protect them with your very life. Okay? It wasn't entertaining. It wasn't just to give them provision, but it was to protect them during the time they were with you, with your very life. And I think that that can give us some insight into the account of Sodom and Gomorrah, right? Which is also part of the Torah portion. And it can give some insight into why it was so important for Lot to insist that these same visitors not stay in the town square at night, and why he protected them the way that he did. This account of Sodom also kind of serves to highly contrast the hospitality of Abraham and of Lot. And the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah, and how cruel that they were to those who visited their town, that's in contrast to the hospitality aspect, right? So hospitality, or the lack of it, is a huge theme both in the Torah portion and the Haftarah. And you see it when you pair the two stories. Okay? So back to the commentary. Now, this author was pointing out that a child, in a way, is a helpless guest in the parent's home. All his or her needs are anticipated and met by the parents, or hopefully, right? But they should be. The child needs hospitality of that sort for their survival. And the child should be cared for until they're ready to leave and go on their own, like a guest. So when the Shunammite woman prepares a room in her home for the prophet, anticipating his needs, providing for all of his needs, Elishua feels that the best way to repay her kindness is with a child that she would also have to anticipate and provide for, right? This is an example of measure for measure. The reward chosen depends on the action. The reward for hospitality is raising a child. Two sides of the same coin. When Sarah prepares food for the 3 complete strangers on a moment's notice, the best way to repay her was to grant in that moment the promised child, a child to also nourish. So it was the act of hospitality that was able to transfer a promise of a child someday into one that says this time next year. So Sarah's reward for hospitality is raising a child. Two sides of the same coin. Because we have the Haftarah paired with the Torah portion, we can see this theme of hospitality emerge. Now, I have a Hebrew idioms course, and one of the lessons, I think it's titled Shout It from the Rooftops, that talks a lot about hospitality. And I think that that lesson would make a really great companion lesson for this one. Because in it, I talk about hospitality between person to person. But as I was praying about this particular Haftarah, it occurred to me that we actually can provide hospitality to God. Does that sound strange? I mean, he doesn't need anything from us, right? He doesn't need food, shelter, sleep. So many times in the Torah, he's comparing and contrasting himself with the gods of the nations who need all those things. So how can we provide him hospitality? That was a question that I was praying about. And immediately what came to me was Matthew 25. So let me read from that. So the Lord will say to those on his right hand, "Come, you," this is starting in verse 34, "Come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the reign prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me." And the righteous shall answer him and say, "Master, when did we see you hungry and fed you, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when did we see you a stranger and take you in, or naked and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and we come to you?" And the Lord shall answer and say to them, "Truly I say to you, in so far as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me." And that is a great encouragement and a promise for us to take care of others, right? And as I was praying about it, it kind of came to me why this principle is true. Each one of us has a divine spark in us, right? Given to us by God. We have a little bit of God in us. Remember in one of the earlier lessons, I said that this is the place that is unwounded, the place that connects to God. So yes, when we care for our fellow humans, we really are caring for that spark of God. But is there more? Can we offer hospitality to God in other ways? To this God who has no needs? I think so. And I think it has to do with the meaning of hospitality. The meaning that's kind of beyond providing nourishment. When you think about it, hospitality creates a home, does it not? I mean, maybe not a permanent home for a visitor, and maybe not even like a physical structure, but hospitality opens its arms and invites someone in, right? To the grieving friend, when you sit with them and you just hold space for their grief, that's hospitality. That's building a home for their heart, right? When you encircle someone in prayer, that's building a home, isn't it? Inviting someone into your personal space, even if that space isn't a location, any place other than your heart, that's hospitality. And I think that's what we can do for God. How so? I think that every time you invite Him into your life, into your circumstances, that's building a home. Every time you include Him in your decision making, that's creating a space for Him, a home. And that really got me. Every time you include Him in your decision making, every time you include Him in all those moments of your life, the good ones, the bad ones, the lovely ones, the scary ones, you're providing Him hospitality, a home. Now I think that idea that we are each a mini tabernacle, a mini temple for God, that really takes it to another level, doesn't it? Now, because we have free will, and bless you, Father, that you have given us free will, we can choose to let Him in and offer hospitality like Abraham and Sarah did, like Lot did, like the Shunammite woman did. With every choice that we make to let Him in to our day-to-day living, our day-to-day lives, we can make a home for him or not. But that's a choice we can make. So I'll see you in next week's Haftarah lesson.